recorded that for her dad early in the week as he was one of the presenters at Brooklyn Temple's Week of Prayer, and I had the privilege of getting it, so I said, why not use it? Again, it's such a privilege to come to you via Zoom today. We'd like to remind our members and supporters that our faithfulness to God is unconditional. Whether we could meet in a building or we meet via Zoom, let us be faithful to God. Now, God says that if you are faithful, He would grant you certain things. What does faithfulness entail? Well, faithfulness entails, the Bible says, 10% of whatever our increase is belongs to God. So we earn $100 a week or $1,000 a week, say. Of the 1,000, 100 belongs to God. That's 1/10 or 10%. But in Malachi 3, it tells us also that we not only rob God in tithes, we also rob Him in offering. And in order for the local church to operate and operate effectively, we admonish that we return at least an additional 1/2 of the tithe. So that would be an additional $50 to go towards the local expenses of the church. The tithe goes to the gospel ministry, not only in paying ministers, folks in the conference office, part of it goes to world mission and so on. There's a lot to do, but God has placed you and me here to make a difference. In addition to that, we have our church building fund, and we ask that we make a contribution to our church building fund. But we also need to keep our local ministries going. And right now, there are lots of ministries that we have in our church, but the one that's uppermost on our minds now, because despite the pandemic, we're still able to make a positive impact. And that ministry is our community services ministry, in which so many members of our church are involved from week to week. But with the pandemic, we had to make some adjustments so that we can continue to provide the meals for this shelter. I encourage us to put aside something every month and dedicate it to this ministry, in addition to the other things that we do. God will bless us all. Yes, it may require some tightening of our belts, but whatever you can do, brothers and sisters, in addition to our faithfulness to God in tithes and offering, let us do it. Let us pray. And now, dear Father, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I'm not going to be long today. I just want to say a few words. We're continuing along the themes for Black History Month. And the theme that I have chosen for this month is hope. We began the first week, the aftermath of hope. Last week, we talked about the resoluteness of hope that we need. We need to be resolute. This week, we'll talk about the resourcefulness of hope. To be resourceful, the dictionary says it's one's ability to find quick, clever solutions to problems that are placed in our paths. And if ever there were a people who needed to find quick and clever solutions, there were Black people, not just in the United States, but especially in the Western world. Black slavery was hell. Make no mistake about it. And when other people talk about the persecutions they met in Europe and Asia and all these different places, and wherever persecution takes place, it's wrong. But we were dragged from Africa, dropped in all kind of islands of the sea, brought to America. We had nothing to do with it. Western slavery, African slavery was hell. And then when slavery was ended, not because of any great humanitarian thrust, because there are many historians and political scientists and even economists have now demonstrated on the dotted line, that's one of the principal reasons why slavery ended was economic more than anything else. Yes, there were some do-gooders, make no mistakes about it, but it was primarily economic. And we know this because there's no way slavery would have ended in the British Empire by 1830s. And it was still going on in America after America had long since rebelled and secured their independence in 1776. It had nothing to do, well, it had little to do with human rights. It had to do with economics. And then, of course, after slavery, there were all the laws that were meant to keep Black down. And yet we find in those years some tremendous examples of people who were resourceful enough not just to survive and to thrive, but to assail even the greatest savages and ravages of racism. One such person I'd like to highlight today is L. Douglas Wilder. I'm going to ask Brother Bastian to put his picture on the screen for us. Wilder was born in the state of Virginia, born Black, and then did well in high school. He finished high school. He applied to the University of Virginia. I'm going to talk about the University of Virginia in a minute, but let's continue here for now. Since the university was being supported by the taxpayers of Virginia, he thought, well, why shouldn't I apply to the University of Virginia? So he applied to the University of Virginia. They turned him down because they said he was Black. And in those days, you could not only do it, you could say it. So he left Virginia. So he stayed in Virginia, he went to Virginia Commonwealth. You know, all of these states had their, especially in the South, had their Black schools that they euphemistically used other terms for. In Texas, still is Texas Southern University, which is different from the University of Texas. In Virginia, it was Virginia Union or Virginia Commonwealth. But he went to Virginia Union University and he studied, graduated, went and fought in the Korean War. Then he got back from the Korean War and he said, well, okay, now that I fought in the war, maybe, you know, the brethren would see some dignity in accepting me. So he applied to the University of Virginia Law School, which is still one of the best law schools in the country. One of my classmates from Oakwood, Sabrina Bozeman, she's originally from Tallahassee, Florida, now lives in Atlanta. She attended the University of Virginia Law School. And they denied him again. They denied him from undergrad. They denied him from college. Now they're denying him the second time, law school. Now this is very important because The University of Virginia was started around 1819 by Thomas Jefferson. It was started for the common folks of Virginia. Of course, that did not include slaves, admittedly. But it was supposed to be the University of the common person of Virginia. The university for the elites was the College of William and Mary, which started in 1693. And named after, and it was commissioned back in 1693, before the War of Independence. So William III and Mary II of England, that's what the college is named after, husband and wife. Now, there are a few things that I want to say about colleges. William and Mary was the second institution of higher education that was established in the United States. Only Harvard started before it. But lest we forget, there's a university which started in 1754, that's Columbia University, that's actually the first university in the United States that actually offered a degree. In those days, prior to Columbia, other schools like Harvard and William and Mary, you'd go and you'd study and you leave. You had no degree. But just saying you've been to these places was enough. You went and you studied with your tutors and so on. Columbia has a distinction for something else. Columbia University, which is still in Manhattan, close to Harlem, is the first American university to offer an MD degree. Yeah. It's not the first medical school. Johns Hopkins Medical School started before, and I'm sure there's some others. But like I said, you go and you do your studies and you go back out to your practice. But Columbia was the first to offer an undergraduate degree and a medical degree. So let's get back to Douglas Wilder now. He applied to University of Virginia. They turned him down flat. They said, no, we don't accept blacks. And so he left Virginia and he went to Howard University and he did a law degree. But then he got back and he started to practice law in Virginia. Imagine, born in Virginia, raised in Virginia, fought in the Korean War, still, no. L. Douglas Wilder, in 1969, was elected as a state senator, and he remained a state senator while he's practicing his law, still was a Virginia state senator. Not a US senator, state, like you have the state legislature, he's part of the state legislature. And then in 1986, he was elected lieutenant. And then in 1980, he was elected governor, the first Black person elected as governor in these United States. Now, some have served as governor. And the first Black to serve as governor since Reconstruction. Reconstruction appeared after the Civil War, when Blacks were doing very well until they pulled the troops out of the South, and lynching, the Ku Klux Klan, and all these things became a reality. Wilder's experience to me is sweet. You remember what the definition of clever, the definition of resourcefulness means? It means a person who's able to find quick, clever solutions. He could have gotten mad and said, this place is crazy. Imagine I was born here, generations here, my people, blood, sweat, and tears here. He could have gotten angry and no, he said, I'm going to be as resourceful as possible. I'm going to find some quick, some clever ways of beating the system. Our text for consideration 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses, last week we did 7 and 8. Today we'll do 7 and 9. 7 says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. And verse 9, persecuted but not forsaken, cast down but not destroyed. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, young people and older ones alike, but especially young people, persecution is no excuse for giving up. This is Black History Month. We must find in the lives of others who've gone on before us inspiration to help us in our gravest moments. Oh, and while we're doing that, let me say something. Please don't send me any stuff about the vaccination. Something is wrong with them. They're doing all this stuff. Please don't send them to me. I believe in God and I believe in science. I do not believe in conspiracies. All right? Please do not send me any more of those crazy stuff. Just in case anybody who sent me a list. Nobody, no member of Peace Club sent me, but other people I used to pastor sent, and they just like to send me these crazy stuff. Let me explain something to you. I follow it every day, right? I'm a student of history. I am aware of the problems of history as it pertains to Black people in America. No two ways about it. But we also need to be careful of conspiracy theories. They are worse than history. As long as whatever system is in place is transparent and verifiable, we should pursue all of those properly. But some of the crazy stuff are going on, they're not true. On their face, we know they're not true. And while they're going on, our people are the most vulnerable to them. Because if it breaks out in the family living in clusters, they have to take the same elevator with other people, especially asymptomatic infections. It could wreak, it has already wreaked havoc in our community. It will wreak even further havoc. So we should be critical, but forget about these conspiratorial things. There are a number of Black people who have dedicated their lives to helping in this situation, and they've done a tremendous job. Check it out for yourself. Somebody called me the other day. Did you hear about this person in Florida who died, another person after they took it? And just yesterday, I double-checked. No one who has taken any of the vaccine that have been approved have died from taking the vaccine. Yes, their reactions, number one. Number two, no one had taken it have died from COVID. So something must be going on. All right? So let's get back about Black history. We must be critical. And some crazy things have happened in our communities. But there comes a time when we have to move on with a critical eye. You should be critical. But we can't afford to be bogged down where we don't trust anything and anyone. No, there's a reason why we send our children to school, so they can get in policy-making position, so they can get in the research position, and they can come out and tell us the truth. And also, all white people are not trying to pull off the wool over our eyes either. There are good white people out there trying to do the right thing, even back when they were doing some of the experiments on our people. Wilder decided he was going to come up with some he's going to come up with some clever solutions. And he remembered something that we should never forget today. One, if you want to beat the system, you have to learn the system. And one of the best ways, I said, one of the best ways to beat the system is to get a standard education. Mm-hmm. Nothing is wrong in education from the streets. But if you really want the man to listen to you and pay attention to you, you've got to excel in certain ways. As a matter of fact, you have to excel more than the white guy has to. Why? That's just the way it is. And the only way you are going to have a chance to change it is that you now must learn the system, get into the system, and make your change. And if somebody doesn't believe that that's possible, think two words: Barack Obama. I'm a student of history. Many presidents, not all, since Truman have been trying to come up with a national health system. Even Nixon, to his eternal credit, tried to do it. They were not successful. Obama believed it because he lived it. And even though his mother was white, he saw her without health insurance. Because, you know, the plight of some poor white people are worse than the plight of some black people. Oh, yeah. Douglas Wilder, remember, he said, look, the only way I'm going to do the system is I have to learn the system. Can you imagine in your own state, you're told, no, you can't get into undergrad. No, you can't get into law school. And you have to leave and go out. But I like the text. Remember the text, persecuted, but not forsaken? There are things that will happen in your life and my life that will dash our hopes at times. But we've got to recoup. We've got to talk to ourselves and say, look, the system is meant to keep me down. And if I stay down, the system is accomplishing its objective. I have to tell myself, look, I am going to beat this by the grace of God. Why? Because the Bible says you may be persecuted, but not forsaken. That even in the midnight of my despair, God has not abandoned me. And then the text goes on to say, not only persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. You see, one of the things the system, and not just the system then, the system now tries to do to all people of color. I remember Elder C.E. Dudley told a story once. I had a clip from Elder C.E. Dudley, Elder John King. Elder C. Dudley was the president of the South Central Conference for over 30 years. Nobody has done that. And he sang well too. He's now deceased. And he had a song he did at Oakwood College Church years ago. I think it was back in the 80s. And I was trying to do it, and we tried our best, but my friend who put it on Facebook and sent it to me by my email had some restrictions in it, so we couldn't get it on today, but it would have been sweet. One of those old black choruses, and he just worked it. But the Elder C. Dudley told a story. Elder C. Dudley said, you know, he spent all of his years in the South working. And he said, one day, this particular man was asked, what did you call that guy? The guy was black. He said an N. I'm not going to say the word, of course. So that same little boy grew up, and he went to Vanderbilt undergraduate. He did master's at Yale and a PhD at Harvard. And he went back to his particular home in the South. And they said, what do you call him now? He said, it doesn't matter how he's educated, he's still in the N. And that's the way some people think. But Wilder proved, and so did Obama and a few others. Deval Patrick was governor of Massachusetts from 2007 to about 2015, 15, yeah. And they show that education can make a difference. In New York, we had an accidental black governor from 2008 to 2010 to serve out Elliot Spitzer's, that's David Patterson, serving out Elliot Spitzer's term because of his problems with the law. But brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, Wilder proved It doesn't matter how deep you are in the South. It doesn't matter how entrenched racism is. By the grace of God, you can overcome it. And so we need not make any excuses for ourselves. Yes, it's hard. Yes, the lift is heavy, but by God's grace, I can do it. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so Paul says, we're persecuted, but not forsaken, cast down, but not destroyed. There's something about us when God is in us. People will try to destroy us. But remember what I told you, a neighbor, as a little boy in Antigua, Brother Robert Heron used to say, he said, if you want to do good, God won't stop you and man can't stop you. There'll be some impediments in your way. You may have to swim some rivers, there are no bridges to cross. But by the grace of God, you can conquer anything in your life. Why? Because you're cast down, but you're not forsaken. You may even get to the point where people expect to give you up as dead, but they shouldn't. Because with God in your heart, he has resurrection power. One of the things that amazes me and satisfies me more than anything else, University of Virginia, which was supposedly started for the common person, which rejected Wilder both for undergrad and law school, from 1990 to 1994, one person determined what the University of Virginia's budget would be, and that's L. Douglas Wilder. The same school that rejected him not once, but twice. He and his staff determined how much money was allocated to that same university. You see, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, and especially young people, in order to be resourceful, you've got to find clever ways of accomplishing your goal. There's some things God is not going to come down here and do for you. You've got to struggle. You've got to work hard. You've got to make sacrifice. Why? Because that's the lay of the land. Folks like to say, well, it's not fair. Of course it's not fair. If life was fair, we wouldn't have all these courts and hospitals and all these different institutions. No, life ain't fair. I'm sorry, life is not fair, sorry. But you can make it better. You remember in my definition of clever, in definition of resourceful, it says you find quick, clever solutions to problems. Quick does not always mean speedy. I think some people misconstrue that. Quick means prompt. If you want to become a doctor, you've got to go to, first you got to take your lessons seriously in from elementary school, high school, undergrad, 4 years undergrad, 4 years of medical school before you just qualify as a doctor. If you're going to be a specialist, you got to go on and do more and more. There's nothing quick about 8 years of your life after high school. But if you're focused and you realize that people's lives in our community depend on you acquiring the skill, you move promptly. A lot of our youngsters now say, I'm going to take off a year, a bridge year. What bridge you want? People are dying in our community. Wilder decided that he had to move promptly. He realized that law can help you change society. And so he left Virginia and went to Howard University, Washington, D.C. And when he was finished, he promptly returned and tried to make a difference. And what a difference he has made. He's still alive today. But quick may also mean expedition. It doesn't always mean fast, expeditious. And expeditious means you do it as soon as it can be done. Everything should not be rushed. As a matter of fact, most things in life are not done well when rushed. But we can be as expeditious as we can be. As the Supreme Court used the term in, which seems almost oxymoronic, I must admit, but it makes sense. In Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court used the term, we must integrate our schools with all deliberate speed. I love that. It means, young people, especially those of you who are Black, you don't have to convince me that things are unfair, that things are uneven. No, I know it, but you've got to get up and do what you have to do. You have a responsibility. As hard as it is today, it's infinitely easier than when Wilder applied for college. We should make no excuses. And as we look around us, if ever we needed more Blacks and browns and different professionals of color, including good, honest, fair-minded white people, it's now. When you look at a police officer having his knee on the neck of a Black man, and then the then president of the United States, along with all of his sycophants, refused to admit that that was wrong. And yet over 70 million people still voted for this guy. Something is wrong. And many of the folks who so-called voted for him are so-called Christians. Now, I have lots of combat with them online because I was very vitriolic with the former president. And it wasn't about politics, it was about morality. And many of my friends who are so-called part of the religious right, I tell them, you're a bunch of hypocrites. You all virtually chased Clinton out of town because you say he was so immoral, he was messing with this young girl, and he was wrong, yes, he was wrong. But you have a president? On every signal, the guy was off. And yet, the religious right stood up squarely behind him. Franklin Graham said, well, his personal life has nothing to do with his politics. Really? Where were they when Bill Clinton? These people. Morality, sexual morality, fairness, racial problems, female problems, every area this guy messed up on. And yet, people are saying he is placed there by God. So I had to remind some of them, since you all felt that he was placed there by God, you should recognize that God took him out. Because they're still belly aching, you know. One of them had, part of the religious right, had a prayer vigil like the 5th of January before the 6th. For God to devise a way of keeping him in power. That's the crazy stuff they have. But Wilder, get it back to Wilder. He recognized that law was one of the most important agencies to make change. Benjamin Cardozo, the law school I attended, is named after him. Benjamin Cardozo said, the final objective of law is the welfare of society. And next week I'll talk about some of the things that Thurgood Marshall talked about the law, because he's going to be the base of my sermon next week. Young people, it wasn't easy, and it's not easy today. I promise you, it's not easy. but it's so much easier than it used to be. You can be anything you want to be today. Unless I've been misconstrued, we don't all have to go to Ivy League schools, and there's nothing wrong in going to Ivy League school. We should aim for as high as we can get. But there's something about those Black colleges, those HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, they perform a service that maybe one day some historian will sit and write about. We know of good Black students. I was talking to one elementary school assistant principal. Had a student graduated from his school, top of his class, went to high school, top of his class, went to one of the big universities on the West Coast, and he could not find his way. He got their scholarship too. So one day he went to speak to one of the professors, and I'm sure Elder Olivia could talk about this. And the professor told him, I kid you not, he said, look, you weren't sent here for us to babysit you. If you can't keep up, you need to leave. Simple as that. No help, no nothing. Well, I know of guys today, many of the guys I went to college with, lawyers and engineers and doctors and so on, real big position. But when they started out, they weren't always able to run. No. But thanks be to God, in Oakwood College, there was a section called the Inner College, where you could go and you'll get tutoring at no extra cost to help you. Why? Because people went to different high schools and they didn't always get the good foundation. I must admit, the New York high schools were top. So I must admit, the New York students always did well. But if you go to certain places that do not have the type of support system, a lot of our youngsters end up getting lost. Now, here's the trick. Some people may need that for them to become professional. Like one of my friends, he became the chief medical officer of the District of Columbia. And now both of his daughters are medical doctors. The assistant that he needed, his children didn't need, because he was able to expose them to more than he was exposed to at their age. And so that's the beauty about it. We must build upon layers to make succeeding generation better than our generation. And no matter what they become or how great they become, help them to remember where they came from. Because it keeps their feet on the ground. Nothing is worse, and we just had one experience in the last administration. Nothing is worse than a Black person who was born dirt poor and then get up to a certain point and kick the ladder down so nobody else could come. If you're going to do that, it's best God has just kept you where you were in the first place. We don't get educated. We don't become qualified for self-aggrandizement. We can't afford to. Too many of our people are dying. I'm going to end. But before I end, I have to tell you this story. When I taught for 2 years at Texas Southern University Law School in Houston. And after 2 years, I said, you know what, I'm going back to New York. I can't take this. It was a great experience. But one of the things that baffled the living daylight out of me was when you have poor Black people telling you, and Hispanics too, that you folks in New York pay too much taxes. Because in Texas, they don't have a state income tax. And I've had to say to them, but they don't have there's some simple things that we take for granted in New York they don't have. And I said, Black folks should not be talking these crazy things about too much taxation. Because if you had a state taxation in the state of Texas, poor people would be better off. The folks who are feeding you that, they're telling you that, hoping that you will keep saying that and voting that way, so that they can keep their fat amounts of money every year. And when you look at what happened in the last week or so, it shows clearly that we need more people of color, people of conscience, to learn the skill, every skill that the man has to learn, so you can go back and make a difference in these legislative halls to touch the lives of men and women. Our people are begging for it. Young people, make the sacrifice. Choose in your heart to be a resourceful person of color. You see, the accolades of life will not come to those who are the flash in the pan, who just does something and, oh, it doesn't work, so they stop. It's for the boxer who gets knocked down 99 times and still gets back up. And we've been knocked down a lot of times. Sometimes we don't have the money, we have to drop out of school. But keep your focus. Sometimes you may have to drop a class because the foundation that you thought you had, you didn't have it. Go back and get the help and retake the class. Sometimes you may have to leave a school because you don't find the camaraderie there that you need to have. But don't give up. You find and devise clever ways to get to where you want to go. A friend of mine who is now a medical doctor came from a poor, humble beginning. He's an African American. And so he wanted to, actually, he's from Bermuda, sorry. He wanted to be an economist. Now, if you're going to be an economist, you have to understand mathematics almost like an engineer. Do lots of math. Calculus 1, calculus 2, linear algebra, probability and statistics 1 and 2. Those are the 5 basic courses. You may have to do more. And so he left Bermuda. He was a cab driver. And he came to Oakwood and he did an associate degree. So I asked him, why you do an associate degree? He said, Stafford, just take it easy. So he did the associate degree, he graduated. And then he went on and did a bachelor's degree, and he graduated. And then he went on and did a master's degree in economics. And I said to him, why? He said, I had to do it in bite sizes. He said, I was out of school for a while, and I wanted to prove to myself I could graduate doing something. So I did the associate degree first, and you won't believe the encouragement that that gave me. It motivated me and told me I could do it. Pretty clever. I know of another friend who was in the Army. She's from an island, I'm not gonna say what island. And she did what was then called the Nurses AIDS program, now it's called CNA. And then she moved on and did the LPN, and then the RN, then her bachelor's, and then a master's degree in nursing. We may have to take, while other people may take a leap, we may have to take steps, gingerly steps. But whatever route you take, you can make a difference. Don't look at the other person. Just look to God. Our community needs it. Our community needs it. Sorry. They're crying out for it. I encourage you to make the sacrifice. Find inspirations in generations that have gone on before us. And by the grace of God, let us leave our footprints on the sand of time to such an extent that we leave the world better than the way we met it. May God help you and help me, help us all to make a difference. You can make a difference, because no matter how many times they knock us down, we can get up. No matter how terrible the enemy may appear, we can all shout with the Apostle Paul, persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Why? Because we have this treasure in earthen vessel, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. God bless you.